We don't have play musical chairs.
What's that? Okay, good here. We call Tuesday.
All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. I call out of recess, Lee County zoning officers petition, Stewart Creek Solar's petition, 2015-55 for special use. We've been in recess since last Thursday evening, and we'll pick it up again here. A couple things for the record. There are 22 people here in the old Lee County Courthouse former main courtroom. Among those present are members of the zoning board of appeals, Mr. Forster, Mr. Hughes, Mr. Bolte, Mr. Pratt, and Mr. Meyer on Zoom. Mr. Burrow did not return from the recess. Ms. Kennedy is here for the petitioner. The Honorable Shirley Boonstra, the Honorable Dean Duffy are present, as is the IT staff, including Alice Henkel, and petitioners here with various representatives and their attorney, Ms. Kennedy. And Ms. Kennedy, the ball is still in your court. You may continue.
Thank you, Judge. I'd like to call our next witness, Tom Huddleston.
Jeff, I'm gonna step up somewhere here and raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Nice seat right there, please. Yes, you certainly may. Whatever makes you feel comfortable with. I'm gonna get farther away from you.
May I inquire, Your Honor?
You may.
Could you state your name and spell it for the record, please?
Yes, ma'am. Tom Huddleston, last name is Huddleston.
And how are you employed?
I'm self-employed with Huddleston McBride Drainage Company.
And what is your job title there?
I'm partners in a group of drainage companies.
And how long has Huddleston McBride been in existence?
We actually operate 4 different companies: Huddleston McBride, Hoop Rider Drainage Company, Countryside Drainage Company, and Messer Tile Services. Messer Tile Services and Hoop Rider have been in business for over 70 years. Huddleston McBride has been in business, and I've operated the company for 47 years.
Do you have any other relevant work experience in drainage?
Yes, we do a lot of consulting work. We do expert witness work. We do a lot of solar. We do highway edge drain. We do about anything that has to do with subsurface drainage.
And when you say you're familiar with solar, can you detail your experience in that realm?
Yes, ma'am. We were involved with the AMA, which is the Illinois Impact Mitigation Agreement. We testified and we made comments. We also met with many counties, also professional agencies such as Natural Resource Conservation Service, the Land Improvement Contractors Association, NRCS, and other municipalities, in helping to set up ordinances and rules to maintain prime farmland in solar and wind.
And when you say the AMA agreement, is that the agreement that the Illinois Department of Agriculture requires a developer to enter into prior to constructing a solar energy system?
Yes, ma'am.
And would you agree that one of the primary goals of the AMA is to address drainage issues and preserve drainage?
Absolutely.
You testified that you sometimes work as an expert witness for solar farms. Can you expound on that a little bit more?
Yes, ma'am, we've testified in many zoning hearings on agricultural drainage and how to maintain drainage from the lands of others, legal mutual drains, and we've also testified with municipalities doing the same.
And you're presumably paid to testify?
Yes, ma'am.
But are you ever paid to testify to exactly what the company wants you to testify to?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Meaning, if the company wants you to say, hey, there's no drainage issues, would you say that?
No, ma'am.
Would you base it on your own investigation and conclusions?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you familiar with Stewart Creek Solar LLC?
Yes, ma'am.
And how so?
I was approached about, I think it was 4 or 5 months ago by the company to look over the project and write a brief on what our opinion was on drainage and to consult on what measures would be used to be able to maintain the prime farmland aspects of property.
And have you had an opportunity to review the petition and the application for Stewart Creek Solar?
Just very briefly.
And did you perform an investigation of the site?
I've been across the sites. I've done some reconnaissance, but I haven't done any site intensive or any preliminary evaluation yet.
What, if anything, can you tell me about the surrounding areas to the project?
It's predominantly farmland. It's an area we're real familiar with. It's been farmland since the mid to late 1800s. It has a lot of drainage. It has a lot of early development. It's very mature, great farmland.
And are you aware of the size of this proposed project?
Yes, ma'am.
And you understand it to be 5,000 acres in size?
Yes, ma'am.
In your experience, do you have any concerns specifically related to drainage about taking acres out of row crop production to use for a solar energy system?
No, ma'am, I do not.
And why is that?
Well, I think that there's methods and procedures to preserve drainage and preserve the prime farmland aspects of property so that when it does come out of solar and is decommissioned, it can go right back into farming.
And the lease agreements for this project is 35 years, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And so do you have an opinion as to whether after this 35-year period, whether the drainage system will be improved within the project footprint?
Yes, ma'am, it will be.
And why is that?
Why would the drainage be improved?
Correct.
Well, in my presentation, I'll be able to explain exactly how we do evaluations and how we rebuild drainage systems so that we can warranty them for the 35-year period.
Mr. Huddleston, are you familiar with HEL ground or highly erodible land?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any concerns about siting a solar energy system on this type of ground?
No, ma'am, I do not, because this land will not be tilled once it's in solar. It'll be seeded and sowed to grasses, which will eliminate the surface erosion.
I think at this time, well, let me back up. It's my understanding that you've prepared a PowerPoint presentation based upon your studies. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you pull it up on the screen, please? Mr. Ellison, looking up at this screen, is this your PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Please proceed.
Thank you. We have, our company has testified in numerous occasions and added and contributed to the agricultural impact litigation agreement, which is a law in the state of Illinois. It requires certain activities to take place, basically in renewable energy, whether it be wind and or solar. I think all agencies and all reviewers will concur that the primary reason for this is to protect what we all consider one of Illinois' most precious resources, and that is prime farmland. So I have a short presentation to show some methodology on how we intend to do that. Next slide, please. So we are traditionalists pretty much when it comes to farm drainage. And before we go into any field to design or to modify drainage systems, it's important for us to understand the early development of the farmland and the history behind the actual draining of these lands. In the Alto and Willow Creek farm regions, farmers settled these lands back in the 1800s back in the mid 1800s to about 1890. Farmers were very diligent and worked cooperatively in turning what we considered at that time natural native wet prairie land into fertile farmland. And of course that required a lot of intensive work and cooperation in subsurface and surface drainage. Early farmers cooperatively built drainage systems to develop land for farming. They first started by maintaining existing natural native channels and rivers. They then moved into digging canals and drainage ditches as primary outfalls. Next, to improve surface drainage within the regions, they started to cut in swales and grass waterways to convey water to the open water courses. They then built large trunk mains.
Sir, if you want to come in, that's great, but I prefer if you stand there at the door, you have a mask, please. Please, thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
Sorry.
That's okay. They then built large main trunk lines and district mains that ran regionally across many farms. Next, they built local collection systems, which are feeders and laterals within individual farms that outlet into these systems. They then improved roadways for transportation along section guidelines. These basic principles were the beginning of what we now call Illinois prime farmland. Next slide, please. Later in the mid-1900s, professional drainage contractors and engineers began to improve and modify drainage systems, which stabilized thousands of acres of new farmland. They created new stable soil conditions and higher crop yields. This was actually the beginning of precision farming and motivated new types of nutrient input systems and hybrid seeds. Drain tile systems are basically clay drain tiles, usually in 1-foot sections that are butted against each other. The gap is sometimes gauged by small tins, and those tins gap the drain tile ever so lightly so that water can enter into the drain tile, but sediment cannot. The drain tiles are then installed at a pitch or a grade, so when the waters free themselves up from the voids within the soil structures, they settle by gravity into the drain tiles and then convey down into the main lines, the sub-mains, and rivers and channels down below. There's several advantages to subsurface drainage. They allow the farmers to be able to till the land in the spring at a much earlier date. It warms the soil much quicker for earlier germination. It allows the crop to grow a much deeper root structure. It allows the entire farm to drain very consistently so that the wetter soils drain at the same time as the more adjacent mineral soils. Therefore, the farmers can get in much earlier and they can harvest much later, which extends the growing season. Next slide, please. Today's drainage technology is very much different. We've started to abandon some of the older systems and put more modified systems in. Today's drainage tillage applications, nutrient inputs, and hybrid seeds have increased American farmland, including Lee County, to be some of the best in the world. Today's drainage systems include a more complete approach to drainage. We now install pattern systems, which are drain tiles that are installed on either 40 to 70 foot centers. They're usually small diameter polyethylene pipes that are plowed in, and then we trench in with open trenchers, larger main lines. There are also, on higher ground and more mineral soils, we still put in herringbone or localized systems, such as the illustration. We sometimes run random systems to areas of the field to intercept hill seepage and other random flows. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. This slide includes actually one of the farms in Alto Township where we would start the evaluation by what we call preliminary drainage evaluation, which is necessary to consider what drainage elements need to be preserved and modified. We first looked at surface drainage. Those are areas where surface waters convey stormwater flows off surface. We then look at and identify what we call legal mutual drains. Those are main lines that run through the farm and actually drain the lands of others. Another term for these are legal mutual drains, meaning that they're covered under Illinois Drainage Code to protect them. Then we look at the on-site collection system, which are made up of feeder laterals and small diameter drain tiles. These tiles have been put in over the last 100 years and function in different manners throughout the farm. And next slide, please. After a preliminary evaluation, we then move into what we call a site-intensive investigation. This is an example of one. This happens to be a farm right south of the Oasis on I-88 in DeKalb. I don't know if y'all noticed, but there's a large commercial complex of 2,000 acres, and we're just completing all of the work in this area. So this particular farm is one of the 1 million square foot warehouses that's going to be constructed. So therefore, in accordance with DeKalb's ordinance, we're required to locate all the drain tiles within the site. This particular site farm had 57,000 feet of drain tile that ranged anywhere from 15-inch down to 3-inch in size. Next slide, please. So the intensive survey actually starts by our team modeling the site to depict which soils would not be able to farm without subsurface drainage. We then cut split trenches across these areas, and when we locate the drain tiles, we either hand probe them or we insert tracer cables up the drain tiles where we can accurately stake them on the surface. After we stake the drain tiles and we repair the cuts, we then survey everything with a Trimble subscription system in centimeter accuracy so that we know exactly where all the drain tiles are. And then there's logs also on the map that includes the size of the drain tile, the type of material the drain tile was constructed of, the quality of the drain tile, the flow rate, the amount of siltation, and the classification, whether it's a main, submain, or lateral. And again, careful emphasis is given to drain tiles which are regional and that we would consider legal mutual drains that travel through the lands of many and benefit upland landowners. If you look at the slide in the lower left-hand corner, there's several tiles extend into upper lands. So we have to reroute those drain tiles so that the upper landowners will continue to enjoy the benefit of those systems. Next slide, please. After we finish the intensive survey, all the drain tiles are reconstructed and modified so that we can warranty them for a 35-year period. If you remember, these drain tiles were put in back in the mid-1800s, and they're a clay material that had no ASTM or material warranty at that time. So therefore, we have to make sure that those drain tiles stay intact for the next 35 years. It's not easy to get into a solar farm to repair a tile or lay additional tiles. So therefore, we reconstruct all the drain tiles with polyethylene dual wall perforated pipe. In some cases, we're able to deepen the drain tiles. In some cases, we're able to enlarge the drain tiles if the upper landowners have an issue with needing extra capacity. And then we replace all the lateral drain tiles as well through the property. We then survey and stake and inventory all the drain tiles, and we make sure that the geometry of the new drain tile system is not in conflict with the solar post operation. So we want to be sure that when the solar posts are driven, that the geometry is going to be not on the drain tile. These drain tiles in many cases are replaced by what we call like-kind procedures, where we actually take the old tile out and insert the new tile. That gives us the ability to be able to pick up whatever feeder laterals that may have been missed in the investigation. So if we do find a feeder lateral, we turn around and we replace that lateral and we incorporate that into the main line as well. So therefore, it's our opinion that by following these best management practices, that include existing drain tile modification, planting deep root stable vegetation, and implementing a noxious weed control program, that we'll be able to assure that when the solar farm is decommissioned, that the prime farmland aspects will remain for future generations. Thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Just a few follow-up questions. How do you propose that we avoid certain construction issues?
Ms. Kennedy, can I get you
That's already good. How can we be sure that during construction, the company or its agents won't hit drainage tiles?
So we have a very accurate map of the drain tiles that's been GPSed. We hand that GPS map system that we prepare to the developer's engineers. And the developer then designs his solar post layout. And he does the best he can to avoid the drain tiles. Now, these solar posts are on an average of 15-foot centers in a grid. So it's not possible in all cases to alleviate all drain tiles. So therefore, we have all the piles staked accurately in the field before we actually rebuild the drain tiles. So when we rebuild the drainage by like-kind procedures, if the drain tile conflicts with the solar post, we would warp the drain tile off of that location so that we're sure that there are not any conflicts.
Do you have any concerns about taking some of our best soils out of production for a solar energy system?
I actually do not, and I can explain. I think that these best management practices where we put in these state-of-the-art systems, where we repair older drain tiles, where we plant deep-rooted grasses, native grasses, where we control the weeds, where we completely eliminate soil erosion, where we actually decrease runoff, that these benefits actually allow the land to pause or rest for a period of time, to build up the nutrients, to build up the soil structures, and for the drainage to perfect. So therefore, when the posts are pulled, then the ground is tilled and then put back into agriculture in most probably a better state than it is before it goes in.
So is it a fair statement that that the soil integrity will also improve over the 35-year period?
Yes, it will. The root structures actually help break the ground up. It alleviates some compaction that a lot of our land is suffering from. It also adds a lot of organic nutrients to the soils as well.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
All right. Turning then to Mr. Boonstra, questions of this witness?
No, Judge, thank you.
Ms. Duffy? No. How about you, Mr. Chairman? Mr. Forster?
No.
Mr. Bolte?
No.
Mr. Pratt?
Yes, I have two. I'm gonna do this right. Not shuffle my papers. So, this is quite a project you're talking about to go in and, are you saying that you're going to replace every tile that's in 5,000 acres?
It wouldn't be every tile. Some of these farms have new tile in them at the time that we can warranty. Like some of them have some plastic drain tile systems that were put in correctly and that will withhold the next 35 years. But most farms, and the biggest percentage, will be clay drain tile, and we would replace those.
You're saying though that even plastic tile that would conflict with posts will be replaced?
Yes, sir. If it does conflict with the post, then yes, it would be replaced.
Do you have any cost estimate of this that you've provided to the company?
We have completed many of these projects. I've done around 50 small community solar projects that are 20 to 40 acres. We're working on several large systems. I'm working on a 1,000-acre complete system in Champaign where we're actually grid tiling the entire site. It's a very flat site. So the numbers are a little bit different than what new drain tile construction is because of the logistics that are required for the location and so forth. So yes, we have cost estimates.
You're surely going to miss tile. I can't imagine that you'll find every
Is that a
tile.
question?
It will be. So, and you made a comment that you can't go back in and fix in a solar farm. What's the alternative? How are you going to solve that problem?
Well, there's one way we mitigate that, and you're right. There are 3 and 4 inch and feeder tiles on top of hills sometimes where you never believe they were there, and they have a function. So by implementing this like-kind replacement, where we actually take the old tile out, that we then run across these laterals because they're teed into those lines, and then we would find them and then be able to replace them. Now, we haven't in any of our projects, we haven't missed tile yet, but if we do miss tiles, then we can go in with mini excavators to be able to reconnect them. But they would most likely be a very small feeder tile if that was the case.
So you say you're going to replace the clay tile that's in the ground. How do you get that out of the ground? I mean,
Yes, sir. We take small excavators and we actually cut the top out of the drain tile with the excavator. And then the labor that's in the trench actually flips the bottom section of the drain tile out. And then that leaves a small cradle in the earth from the original drain tile. So then we seat the new polyethylene pipe in that same cradle. But most importantly, what it does is it allows us very easily to be able to see a T connection or a lateral connection.
so this is above and beyond what's asked for in the AIMA agreement, correct?
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Is there any cost to the landowner for this?
I can't answer that question.
Okay, so let's talk about the runoff. You mentioned that you think there'll be less.
Yes, sir.
The panels are going to concentrate the water. You don't think that'll create more runoff?
No, sir, the water then falls on the ground, and of course, the ground is not bare land as it would be in farming. It's a very rigorous prairie plant that has a deep generation of roots to improve permeability. So the water's not able to run off the land as quickly because the runoff coefficient is very low. And then the water would soak into the ground because the land is more perforated because of the root structure from the prairie plants. And then the drain tiles actually dewater the soil structure in the during the intermittent storm, so that there's plenty of storage within the soil structure to hold the water and release it slowly through the drain tiles.
The drain tile are there already.
Yes, sir, correct.
Before the project was started.
Yes, sir.
You're not going to add tile.
In some cases, we've added tile in some areas, but you're right. But remember, we're taking all the compaction out of the soil. We're improving the permeability so the tiles will work more efficiently. Some of the tiles we actually replace as well will be drain tiles that are in very poor condition, may have silt or dirt in them, may be completely broken down. So we'll be adding new tile or modifying old tile that need new characteristics.
There's quite a few creeks in this property. Are you going to do anything to the creeks?
No, sir. We don't have any plans to dredge any creeks.
Not remove any tree lines in the creeks or anything?
Not to my knowledge. No, sir.
That would be your recommendation.
In some cases, some drainage channels need maintenance. I haven't looked at the drainage channels within this watershed yet, but as you well know, all farm ditches need to be cleaned and maintained from time to time. Now, I can tell you that the solar farm will not add nearly as much silt to these ditches as the farmland does, so the ditches will have a longer life to them.
Further questions?
Mr. Meyer? Are you up there?
Did he say no question?
Okay. All right, interested parties, those in the courtroom. Did I just, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I thought I went boom, 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 boom.
Oh, that's all right, and I have no further questions.
I'm sorry. All right, interested parties in the courtroom, live in the courtroom by a raise of hand. Questions of Mr. Huddleston, please. Yes, sir, I see you first. We've got those microphones in the middle, thank you. And if you'll help us get started with your name and the community which you consider yourself living in.
John Huber, H-U-E-B-E-R. I guess I got a couple simple questions.
Community?
Stewart,
Thank you.
rural Stewart. On that, Atwood 16, I live on, you're familiar with it.
Yes, sir.
Tom Hart put waterways in that
Yes, sir.
a year ago, and I cruise around on that in my four-wheeler and stuff. Because I know the farmers that farm it, and those waterways got cut really hard that first spring and then the next summer.
Yes,
You
sir.
actually sense that.
You're telling, sir, you're telling things. You gotta
Okay.
ask them
I was
questions.
wondering, will the solar panels be in the waterways where they have the panels on either side of
That one example I showed, the panels actually skip the waterway. So these waterways have to be maintained, just as yours on your farms. They have to be mowed and they have to be reseeded in some sorts. Now, I can tell you that the waterways probably won't cut as badly in a solar project as they do a regular farm because of the intensity of surface flow.
it? I guess that's the only question I had.
Okay, thanks. Somebody else with questions? Yes, sir.
Adam Lutz from near Albina. So what solar farms or solar systems have you studied for stormwater runoff to base your assessments on?
Well, we've worked on many of them, and I've been in many hearings with a lot of different hydrology engineers and a lot of experts. And I think the general engineering industry would all tell you that the runoff in prairie grass is much less than bean stubble.
But what, my question was actually, what solar farms have you studied?
Champaign is one.
Is it up, you've studied it like up and active?
No.
Active solar farms, have you studied?
No, but there are many studies published on prairie fields and the runoff characteristics of prairie.
Correct. So how does solar panels change stormwater runoff on land?
Well, they don't, actually. I mean, it's the vegetation on the surface that changes the runoff. And so if the surface,
How
You're
does,
interrupting. You asked him a question. You gotta let him finish. Go ahead.
so the surface runoff in natural native prairie grasses would be much more retarded than it would be on bare cropland.
what about mowed prairie grass?
Mowed prairie grass would be the same, and actually mowing is one of the methods to help control weeds and to help the quality and the density of the prairie grass itself.
So am I correct then, you have not studied any stormwater runoff of active solar farms in the country?
I have not personally. No.
Are you aware that there's studies out there that show that stormwater runoff increases 1.5 times what the
No.
standard is?
No.
Okay. What recommendations are you making to this company to help manage surface stormwater runoff? Not subsurface, but surface water runoff.
To identify and maintain surface conveyance channels and to skip those channels with solar panels so that they can be maintained.
Okay. Are you proposing then that you are installing grid pattern tiling across the entire 5,000 acre parcel?
No, sir.
So you're not updating past what is currently there then?
Well, if there's a pattern system that's already existing and it's clay drain tile and it's in conflict, we would replace it. But most of the parcels that I've looked at are more random systems. They're more of a gradient. So we would not be pattern draining those systems.
What drainage law governs an SES? So there's agricultural drainage law and there's industrial or commercial drainage law.
We abide by what's called Illinois Drainage Code.
Can you elaborate, are there differences between?
Yes, sir. Illinois Drainage Code pertains mostly to agricultural interests.
And so does that apply to a solar project, an industrial solar project?
Yes, sir, it does.
Are you allowed to change the water flow under that drainage law?
No, sir, absolutely not.
Are you aware that of this 5,000 acres, 2,897.14 acres have a PI index or a productivity index above 133?
No, sir, I'm not aware of it. It does surprise me.
Are you aware that Class A soil type is a PI index of 133 and above?
Yes, sir.
You believe that prime Class A soils should be reserved for food production, agriculture use?
I actually think that all prime farmland should be maintained for its natural resource ability to be able to grow food. I also believe that it's not bad for farmland to rest or pause, to be regenerated by new nutrients and to take it off the working grid for a period of time.
Is there gravel roadways that will be installed on this project?
I can't answer that. I don't know the answer to that.
Does gravel change surface water or subsurface drainage?
Yes, sir, it does.
How so?
Certain gravels are impervious if they're compacted or such as CH6, for example. So there would be impervious state in gravel driveway.
Does that impact how you might want to drain that soil?
No,
Does that impact the amount of stormwater runoff that neighboring farms may have from this project?
it would, although the new condition, which would be prairie plants, overwhelms any additional runoff that a gravel service way would contribute.
You don't have any studies for us as evidence or to back up these claims?
That's typical civil engineering calculations.
There's no studies though on solar stormwater runoff then to reference, it's just engineering.
I'm sure there are. I'm not prepared to produce one right now.
Thank you, that's all I got.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Still folks in this room, questions, raise your hand. I can't. Yes, sir. Purple cap. Absolutely. Get as close to the microphone, and your first instinct is to push it away, and everybody's in, and get right up next to it.
I got no problem with the microphone, Judge.
Great. Name and community, please.
Joel Prestegard, outside of Lee. I'll have a mile of these around me. Thank you for your time, first and foremost. Appreciate you being here.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Prairie plants. Do you know what kind they're planting? Have you been brought up to speed? Any idea?
That's a great question. There has been an overwhelming response throughout Illinois and Indiana and Wisconsin to plant deep-rooted, large native prairie plants, which sometimes include big blue stem, for example. Those prairie plants grow a root structure that can be 6 to 8 feet in the ground. I have asked this solar developer to consult with some ecologists who can propose some native plants that don't have root structures that get into the drain tiles. So it'll be a combination of native plants that have a little lower, a little shallower root growth, maybe 24 inches or 20 inches in depth.
Okay, thank you. And with those, I assume that there's a height minute or maximum that they can reach. That's a problem with natural prairie grasses, is they get too high for solar, right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
How do they react to herbicides and such as Roundup and so forth, native grasses?
You'd have to ask the
Fair enough.
prairie contractor that question.
Excuse me here. Yeah, AGL ground. Thank you for answering that question.
Yes, sir.
How much of this project is classified as AGL ground?
I haven't been privy to those private records yet from the landowners, so I'm not sure.
No, understandable. I know some of the farm ground personally, just because I've lived there my whole life, so I know there is. You did mention that AGL ground covered in vegetation shouldn't really be an issue, but what, in your opinion, or better yet, with your profession, what would classify, what are the factors that classify land as highly erodible?
Slope and soil type.
Those are the two biggest out of the Russell, right?
Yes, sir.
So without that, what would driving a post every 15 foot into highly erodible ground do during the construction phase? disturbing the soil in such a manner. You said highly erodible grounds never tilled, correct?
We're
I'm sorry, you're right, that was two. Nope.
The trouble with two questions is he doesn't know which to answer.
No, that was my bad.
Well, I'm explaining to everybody else too. And when you read the record, you can't tell which question he was answering.
Understood, thank you.
So go ahead, just ask one.
Let me back up. So you're going to go in and tile highly erodible ground, correct?
Yes, sir.
They're going to put a post in every 15 foot on center.
Yes, sir.
In your opinion, what will that do during the construction phase to the highly erodible ground in the manner of a large rainfall?
The posts are actually driven in pneumatically, so there's not any soil disruption at all, so there wouldn't be any bare ground that would be subject to eroding.
Okay.
Caused by the solar post installation.
Just the only ground then that would really be disturbed would be what you tiled through.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. This seems pretty elementary, but why do we put gutters on houses?
To convey the water away from the house.
And if you don't have them, what happens to the ground beneath the roof structure?
Becomes saturated.
Would there be any channeling? If there was a slope?
For a house that had 4,000 or 5,000 square feet, yes.
How many square feet are proposed in this solar panel project that will have slope?
I'm not sure how big the panels are that we proposed.
Okay. Sorry about that. And I do appreciate your work up in DeKalb. You said that was how big of a project?
Around 2,000 acres and growing.
Has your company ever done a 5,000 single-use project before? 5,000 acre single-use project?
Yes.
Fantastic. Is the topography of DeKalb any different than the topography of Stewart Creek?
There's some farms in Stewart Creek that has similar topography. The DeKalb land is pretty flat.
Pretty good ground up there, isn't it? Or that's more of a stick to flatter. I apologize here, I just got a few more questions. Will your tile work increase the value of the current landowners?
Yes.
Will it increase the value of the non-participating adjacent landowners?
Yes.
And how would that be?
The legal mutual drains or the main drain tiles that go through the solar farms are normally pretty old, and they would be new tiles so that the upland landowners would have a better tile for discharge.
The upland land, what about the ones that live on the downside of all this water?
We would just discharge it in the same existing tiles.
Under Illinois, just answer questions, please.
Okay.
No, that was directed at him.
Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't looking at you, Judge, my problem. Just making sure I cover. How many acres of this project are currently enrolled in CRP?
I don't know the answer to that.
When you make gravel driveways, when you yourself or your company, what would be the top layer then of gravel that you would use?
CA6.
You said earlier that's the one that packs in hard and won't let water permeate. Is that correct?
Correct.
I sure do appreciate your time, though. Thank you so much for taking my question, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in the courtroom? Yep. And you'll help us to start by stating your name and the community in which you consider yourself living.
Hi, yes. My name is Andrew Huss. I live in outside of Lee, Illinois.
You may inquire.
So the mitigation you're talking about, the measures and soil developments and negative impacts, if there's negative impacts on surrounding parcels, is this covered under the mentioned warranty?
I'm sorry, could you restate that, please?
So if the measures that you put in to mitigate the mitigation measures, that the impact other land, will your warranty cover the other land?
The mitigation, which requires vegetation and the rebuilding of the existing drain tiles, would have a positive benefit to adjacent land.
So for instance, if 95 acres surrounding my house and the runoff were to come onto my property and run towards a building or something, would the warranty cover that coming towards my house or my building?
I'm not sure if there's a warranty in place for that, but Illinois Drainage Code would certainly dictate that.
Are there any studies on the land that has contained these root systems of the prairie grass and then gone back into crop production after 35 years?
Yes, sir, there's numerous technical papers and studies about root and prairie plant introduction into farmland.
Are there any studies that have followed drain tiles in a utility scale solar field for 35 years?
No, sir.
No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other folks here in the courtroom? Okay, turning to the Zoomers. Folks, if you don't remember how, excuse me, if you don't remember how, if you're video conferencing on Zoom, you go to participants, I think it's the bottom center of the screen, click on that, and it should show you a drop-down list that includes raised hand. Hit raised hand and I will call on you in due course. If you are teleconferencing on Zoom, meaning you can't see us but you can hear us, leave your cell phone on, but on your dial, hit *9, and that should show us your hand, and I'll call you in due time. Now's the time to indicate if you got a question. Give you 10 seconds here to find your way through the technology. Alice, are they all showing on the screen?
Yes, and there are no hands.
I can't see them. Okay, very good. Mr. Hudson, you may step down. Thank you. And I think now's a good time for any break until 8 o'clock. Wait a minute. Let's make it 5 after 8. Real time, not courtroom time.
Pass these out now.
Remind me to admit that.
Yes, please.
I forgot.
It's my mistake.
No, it's not. My job. Okay. How you doing, Kelly? Going okay?
Yeah, doing good.
Is it really?
No, I know, but.
They came up. Some of them. North side.
You asked them.
Finally, the guy that's he's the one I know about something. And he got over
I only got one. We have one. I see. Right.
But they want to really go. You know.
Is that better?
all bees and all four. Just came up. Put that light or something right
What's going on with your county?
now.
We, like, they made the motion to approve to have you, and now we're just waiting, or
And put that on.
do they have?
Oh, you haven't heard?
No, no.
November 19th,
Oh, is that? They are doing it?
started.
Oh, they are, okay. So the next meeting will be
I
in
got
person?
a box today. It's almost hard to live.
I don't know.
We've been not in person, so we've been doing everything via Zoom,
Yeah,
so now we'll be back.
but with a limit of,
Right, X amount.
forgot,
Yeah.
I think it's gonna be 25.
Right, right.
So, yeah. They say-
So their next normal hearing.
Right. How much we're gonna get in, haven't got it all.
It's just the re-putting it back up, is that what you're doing?
All they're doing is changing it to make, maybe you're not to make just a lot. But that raises new questions of sound, setback, because you're gonna be so
Yeah.
far from height. Sound setback, environment, shadow flow.
Right.
So it's not, but it's, I mean, but it's the same reasons, that's good. It's the same path, same dimension. So
We have these hearings, and then also in December, starting more.
So until December, so we start big scale as they're done. No, wait. So in December, presuming we finish with the we're gonna, on the same night, start to do the next.
Yeah.
But I forget who gets to go first. I think it's big scale. I think they beat the fight.
But that's two different companies.
That's two. One's wind and one's solar.
Right?
The solar one. You're almost as big as this one.
Oh.
That's much closer.
Oh. Okay.
This one's long.
Yeah.
It's long, 30. It's on the east side of 30.
Oh.
If you drove past it, you'd think that's Oregon.
So,
In fact, if you can imagine along Route 39, that strip along the eastern border is Oregon. It's kind of-
okay. So, right, yeah.
so it's like, I could hit a driver.
Right. Into the other county.
Yeah.
Lovely. Oh.
You gonna raise my taxes where you're at?
No, not at all.
Yeah. What's wrong with microphones now?
The Zoom people are getting really muffled.
I think it was, yeah, something to do with his microphone getting too close then, after a while. Because he started off great.
Yeah, not that.
I think it was just,
Why don't you make this a condition of somebody's fee the next time? Well, that's easy. If they pay $106,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, we forget how good that is. Yeah, we can start in the morning, we go over. Yeah, that's right.
If you showed up physically, you could fit this.
All righty. Slavin lingo for everybody to find their seats. Everybody is finding their seats. I will note for the record and for anybody who's typing enough to be keeping track, I've marked Mr. Huddleston's the hard copy of Mr. Huddleston's PowerPoint, petitioner's number 5. I've also been handed a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-page proposed exhibit that I marked petitioners number 6. It's entitled Stewart Creek Solar Project, SCI Engineering Inc. since 1978 on the front page to identify it. That's number 6, but that one's not admitted yet. Number 5 is. And Ms. Kennedy, you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. I'd like to call Scott Billings as our next witness.
Raise your right hand, please. You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give me the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Proceed.
And if you want to take up your mask while you're testifying, that's what I'm saying.
Your Honor.
May I proceed, Your Honor? Could you state your name and spell it for the record?
Sure, Scott Billings, Billings.
And can you give us a brief summation of your educational history?
Sure, I have a bachelor's in geography/GIS and a minor in economics from Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville. And I have completed my master's classroom work in environmental science, but have not completed my thesis work.
And how are you presently employed?
I am a senior project scientist for SCI Engineering, and I've been there since 2006.
And what are your job duties?
My job duties are generally, I am in charge of our natural resource group, so that includes wetland delineations, endangered species surveys, SWIP preparation, anything and everything that pertains to natural resources in regards to anything from solar farms to subdivisions.
And do you have any other relevant work experience outside of SCI?
An internship with the IEPA right before I started SCI in 2006.
And what is your experience with solar farms?
We have provided similar services to what I'll explain tonight on several solar farms. One in Southern Illinois, one in Missouri, and generally a few others that probably never made it to build. But yeah, so generally same sort of situation as far as natural resources with solar farms themselves.
And what is the largest solar farm that you've studied?
I would say the largest one was one in Missouri, which was right around 3,000 acres.
And is this your first time testifying as an expert witness?
It is typically in a lot of these situations with our due diligence services being on the upfront, we don't call in to do this too terribly often on many of our projects.
Are you familiar with the Stewart Creek Solar Project?
I am.
And have you had the occasion to review Stewart Creek's application and petition?
I have reviewed a good chunk of it, particularly those that pertain to what we were being asked to review.
And what are those?
The appendices that include the landscape weed vegetation control plan and a few others that are in regards to natural resources.
And you are aware that this is a proposed 5,000 acre solar farm?
Yes, ma'am, and more.
And what did the company hire you to do?
We were hired to provide a preliminary desktop assessment of the project area itself, as well as review some of the documents that have been previously prepared.
Have you reviewed the Lee County ordinance as it relates to solar energy systems?
I have.
And in the environmental context, what is a proposed developer required to do?
Well, as it pertains to anything that we were reviewing, there is a particular section, I think it's around under number 7, entitled Endangered Species and Wetlands. Generally, it states that the applicants would need to run the project through the EcoGAP program, which is a endangered species assessment program administered through Illinois Department of Natural Resources, as well as identify any other endangered species or wetland habitat that might be on site that could be impacted by development.
And to the best of your knowledge, has the company consulted with IDNR through the EcoCat system?
As far as I know, yes, the EcoCat, in my understanding, was submitted to IDNR. It came back clean, and when that happens, usually, and in this case, the consultation is terminated.
What, if anything, can you tell me about the surrounding area to the project?
Just based on a desktop assessment, and we did provide a drive-by of the site using the public roads back on September 9th of 2020. It's predominantly agriculture. We identified several areas, took photos of several areas where there was water drainages, a lot of swales that go along with agriculture as they would in any other location. So, but overall, our assessment was, predominantly agriculture.
And so the company had already met the threshold requirement for initiating its consultation with the IDNR. Do you know why the company retained SCI for this project?
Well, as in any other project, there are certain loopholes, or not loopholes, but things you have to do as part of any project. For instance, in regards to wetland and water bodies, if there is going to be impacts, there are certain permits that you have to have. For instance, if you impact a jurisdictional wetland or water body, you would need to obtain a Section 404 permit from the Corps of Engineers, and Section 401 water quality certification from the IEPA. So with that being said, although we've done a desktop analysis, there still is field work that will need to happen as far as that's concerned. Desktop will get you so far, but prior to construction, we would assume that the agencies would require field work in that regard. And that's the same as for threatened endangered species as well.
And it's my understanding that you prepared a PowerPoint presentation for tonight?
That's correct.
And is that your PowerPoint presentation on the screen there?
Yes, ma'am.
Please proceed.
Okay, so the main reason that I wanted to provide this presentation was just to provide an overview of generally what our tasks were and generally what we're covered as part of this project. So next slide, please. Just a little bit of background about SCI Engineering and our qualifications. We were started in 1978 primarily as geotechnical engineers, and over the years we have added on several disciplines as we see fit. We have offices in Missouri, Illinois, Texas, and Colorado, and we offer a full suite of engineering services from geotechnical all the way down to natural resources, which is what I'm here to talk about today. Next slide, please. In regards to natural resources, just a rundown generally of what we provide and how we're looking at this particular project. Again, we've done thousands of wetland and water body delineations anywhere from North Dakota to Mississippi and everywhere in between. We focus on the St. Louis area, north and south, deal with the permitting aspect of wetland and water body impacts, provide mitigation for wetland impacts in the way of design, banking, and monitoring of those sites. And we also deal with the stormwater side of things. So this is development of SWIPs and meeting these national pollutant discharge elimination system. And lastly, we provide threatened endangered species surveys. This could be anything from bats to birds to cage species, so and everything in between again. Next slide, please. Okay, in regards to this project, we were asked just to provide a preliminary assessment of the desktop analysis that was provided, as well as those reports that have been previously provided as part of the application. So as you can see there, we generally covered 5 different topics, including wetland water bodies, wildlife corridors to endangered species, stormwater management, and vegetation management. Next slide, please. So I'm going to run through each one of these with a couple slides and just provide our general assessment and opinion on several of the matters. In regards to wetland and water bodies, so typically, and is the case in this situation as well, most solar farms and larger projects and energy projects in general try to avoid impacts if at all possible. In this particular case, the applicant looked at the topographic map. We did the same thing, looked at National Wetland Inventory map and several others, aerial photographs and floodways, and generally tried to design around those wetland and water body impacts. So again, it should be noted that although this is the case, it's more than likely going to be the case that all of this must be ground truth at some point prior to construction. So although we've identified and these impacts are generally being avoided, they still need to be proved by actually getting on the ground and doing the surveys. Next slide, please. Again, just to cover generally, as I just discussed, everything has to be either confirmed as present or absent on the site. We would recommend that if there are wetland and water body impacts, that those impacts be avoided and things be moved in order to avoid those impacts. And again, just to clarify, impacts can be direct or indirect. It all depends. So many of these things, the drainages, water bodies that we're discussing, some will be jurisdictional, many of them won't. So we would provide an assessment of that before construction. And again, unavoidable impacts, if necessary, we need to go through the permitting process with the Corps of Engineers and the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency prior to construction. Next slide, please. So during our assessments, we identified several wetlands and water bodies within the study area itself. However, as I stated, it appears, based on our review of the site plan, that those wetland and water bodies that have been mapped on the desktop analysis would generally be avoided. So there is a pretty good chance that, based on our assessment, that wetland and water body impacts would be avoided and permitting would not be necessary in this case. Next slide. Moving on to wildlife corridors. So again, with the site being predominantly agriculture, wildlife corridors are pretty minimal. What we look for when looking at wildlife corridors would include stream features, riparian corridors along stream features, anywhere where it would be best suited for animals to move to and from the site. So we did an assessment of that and got a general idea of where those sites are. And again, much like wetland water bodies, it appears that a lot of those areas are going to be avoided during construction. Next slide. The one thing that came up and needed to be discussed was the fencing situation. Obviously, with projects such as this, fencing needs to be installed from a security standpoint and to make sure that people are staying out of these systems. So our only recommendation would be, there are some new fencing options that allow some of the smaller species to get in and out. Again, birds would not be affected by that in any means. It would just be the larger animals. However, as is the case in any developments, the animals will find a way to get to and from the site. So with it being predominantly agriculture and avoiding forested areas, it shouldn't have a significant impact. Next slide. In regards to threatened endangered species, we did just a quick analysis of any species within Lee County that may pop up on a project such as this, and we identified 4. Those include the Indiana bat, the northern long-eared bat, eastern prairie fringed orchid, and the prairie bush clover. So 2 of those obviously are bat species, the other 2 are plant species. It should be noted that these are federally listed species, and I'll generally go through each one here real quick and provide our assessment. Next slide. In regards to bats, so the Indiana bat and northern long-eared bat are 2 federally endangered. Well, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. The Indiana bat is federally endangered, while the northern long-eared bat is federally threatened. So both species generally hibernate in caves during the winter, and they roost in trees during the summer. So with that being said, based on the the fact that tree clearing will generally be avoided during construction, it was our assessment that although the bats may be in the area, any construction as part of this project would not have a negative effect on those species. So again, in regards to the EcoCat, the consultation should be terminated in that regard as well. Next slide. In regards to the prairie bush clover and the eastern prairie fringed orchid, the bush clover is generally found in tall grass prairies. So when we did our assessment and determined that almost the significant amount of the project site was in agriculture, we can generally assume that that species would not be impacted by the particular project. And the same thing generally goes for the eastern prairie fringed orchids. So they like wet prairie conditions and also wetland habitat with full sun. So again, by converting the ag land to solar, it generally would not have a negative effect on these species. And it may actually have a positive effect on the species if the seed bank is there. So with that being said, as far as those 4 species, we don't foresee any major obstacles in regards to the project. However, much like a wetland water body situation, we would likely have to ground truth anything and identify those species if they were there. Next slide. We generally mentioned this already, but the project has gone through the EcoCat system through the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. Nothing was identified during the EcoCat, and consultation was terminated with the Heritage Database. And just so everybody understands, that includes natural areas, dedicated natural preserves, and registered land and water reserves. So none of those areas were identified as part of the EcoCat as well. Next slide. In regards to stormwater management, it is my understanding that grading will generally not be necessary as part of this project. So we generally looked at what that would look like and what would need to happen as far as the stormwater management was concerned. So again, with it being generally agriculture, it was our opinion that basically when you convert it over and include the native vegetation, that a lot of that stormwater is not going to be significant. I know Mr. Huddleston covered a lot of this as well, so I won't repeat everything he said, but as part of the project, we would also need, or somebody would need to provide a stormwater pollution prevention plan or a SWIP. And in that case, generally that would cover any stormwater that would leave the site, and that would include BMPs that I'll cover in this next slide. Next slide, please. So again, a site-specific SWIP must be prepared based on the fact that there's greater than 1 acre of impact. So that would include, again, your BMPs such as stormwater detention and retention basins, ditch checks, silt fence, things of that nature that were designed to keep any silt on site during and post-construction. A change in land use, primarily agriculture, should not have a negative effect on the environment. Again, for the same reasons that were told by Mr. Huddleston. And then once the solar farm is stabilized, we don't anticipate any major stormwater effects based on the change in vegetation, as well as the fact that the large majority of the drain tile will be kept in place or added for that matter. Next slide, please. So we also reviewed the landscape weed and vegetation control plan that was prepared by Stewart Creek LLC to kind of get a better idea of what that vegetation plan is going to look like. Again, solar farms typically sited on land is unsuitable for their development and on agricultural land, which is the case on this particular project as well. No tree clearing is our understanding. No tree clearing will be necessary as part of this project. So there wouldn't be any effects in that regard. And in non-native and invasive species, it would actually increase the control of those as part of this project as well, based on the management plan that we reviewed. Next slide. So as I said, we reviewed the landscape weed vegetation control plan, reviewed the native seed mix that would go into planting between the solar arrays, and looked at generally what effect that would have on native populations. Some things that to note that the seed mix would increase the pollinator species that are going to use the site. It would increase some wildlife value, as we discussed, and again, provide invasive species control throughout the 5,000 acres. So overall, when we looked at those 5 different topics, we did not identify anything that wasn't covered or that would have a significant effect on the project itself. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. When you mentioned that the wetlands and waterways would be avoided, do you mean that the project will be set back from all wetlands, floodplains, and waterways?
That is my understanding, correct?
And does the same ring true from the wildlife corridor?
Correct.
I have nothing further, Your Honor. Judge, I actually lied to you. I'd like to admit this into evidence, please. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Boonstra, questions, Mr. Billings?
Thank you, Judge.
How about you, Ms. Duffy?
Sure. So are you aware of the pesticides that they're proposing to use? Oh, that's right. Mr. Microphone.
Do you know what kind of pesticides that Hexacon is proposing to use to keep the vegetation down around the fence lines and under the solar panels?
I do not at this time.
You know if bats roost under the solar panels?
I can't say for sure that they won't, but there's no studies to show that they would. They generally, it would be too open of an area for the particular bats that we looked at for them to likely roost in those areas.
That's all, Judge.
Thank you. All right, interested party, zoning board members, Mr. Forster.
No questions.
Mr. Hughes,
No questions.
Mr. Bothy.
No question.
How about you, Mr. Pratt?
Yes, I have to do your wetland and water body delineations, what did you use to do that?
We have only done a desktop analysis using USGS topographic maps, National Wetland Inventory maps, aerial surveys. So we have not done any field work as of yet. All of that would need to happen during project development.
So you talked about avoidable impacts, unavoidable impacts. What's a waterway?
A waterway is, well, if you're asking me what something, a jurisdictional waterway is, a jurisdictional waterway is a waterway that has a defined bed and bank and a defined ordinate high water mark. There's a new rule that went into place per the federal government known as the National Water Protection Rule. And generally what it's stated is that for something to be jurisdictional, it has to be either intermittent or perennial, meaning which generally is defined by the water flow. So as part of any project development, including this one, we would need to assess each and every water body that's within the study limits.
Should have been a little better on that question. As a farmer, a waterway to me is what's a grass strip through the field where the water runs down. Do you call that an avoidable impact?
I don't, how I can speak to that is in most cases, that would be a non-jurisdictional feature. So impacts to that area would likely not need permitting. However, as not part of the design team, I don't know if those areas would be avoided or not avoided. And I'm sure it would go piece by piece.
You don't make that determination to the council.
No, we will identify during field surveys what is jurisdictional, and what would be regulated by the Corps of Engineers.
On the wildlife corridors, fencing,
Mr. Pratt, can you get a little closer?
on the wildlife corridors, fencing. There's creeks with trees. Are you gonna recommend fences on each side of that flowing water?
My understanding, based on the preliminary site plans that we reviewed, is there will be no fencing near those creeks or water bodies.
So how does that create a wildlife corridor?
Well, so our assessment of wildlife corridors was just to identify where we felt those species are likely to concentrate. So with that being said, the project, including the fence plan, could be designed around those areas. So that was really all the purpose of our assessment was at this point.
So you won't make a recommendation to put a fence on each side of,
We will tell the applicant where the wildlife corridors generally are, which generally correlate to the wetland and water bodies that have been identified on the desktop assessment. But ultimately, it will not be our decision on where the fence will actually go. We would just provide our recommendation on where those wildlife corridors are.
so on the vegetation plan, have you ever thought about seeding the property before construction of the solar panel?
So with there being no grading, what generally happens is as soon as construction is over, you would provide a nurse crop or a cover crop, something like gamma oats, which basically is a quick growing crop that would be put down generally as soon as it's completed. And then the seed mix would go on top of that in an effort to avoid any erosion or any significant erosion. But to answer your question, it would be difficult to seed it prior to construction because it would likely not grow based on the fact that you're going to be utilizing that area.
How much time do you think is necessary to get that cover crop established?
It's usually a few weeks, but again, if we're not grading and there's no bare soil, it would take that long, but we would assume that a lot of that erosion wouldn't happen just based on the fact that you're not tearing up the topsoil right off the ground.
I guess my further question was to get established to the prairie grass vegetation that the previous testimony said that would be good.
Sure. There in the landscape plan itself, and I don't remember off the top of my head, but as far as the management itself, there's a very, very defined schedule on what that will look like. But I'm not prepared to tell you exactly what that is at this moment.
No further questions.
Thank you. All right, now, interested parties in the room, by a raise of your hand. Question to this gentleman. Yes, sir. Now, Mr. Line, I'm going to call you. Unless the I stands for the Hawkeyes, which I.
No, God.
Just made it a free check. Or Indiana. Or Idaho.
Appreciate you being here and taking my
You
question.
know his name, Kevin?
Oh, yeah, good point. Joel Preston, live outside of Lee. Why didn't the other projects, the ones that didn't go to build, why didn't they go to build in your opinion?
Oh, that could be for a number of reasons. In reality, I highly doubt it had anything to do with any of the studies that we were providing.
What part of Missouri was that large?
That was in just north of St. Charles County. I'm drawing a blank on what county that actually is.
St. Charles County, south?
North of St. Charles County.
Okay. Predominantly farm ground?
Not as much as this, but, and a lot more slopes. So that is a particular project that I don't think has actually went to construction yet for a number of different reasons that I don't know.
So they wouldn't have had an average PI then on that? It's probably a bad question, don't worry. So you say to date, you've only done a desktop assessment and review of prepared documents?
That's correct.
Prepared by, who were those documents prepared by? I'm sorry.
Well, the majority were provided by Stewart Creek Solar LLC. And then we also, reviewed the natural resource plan that was provided by, the Lee County Soil and Water Conservation District.
Your engineering firm hasn't had any boots on the ground then today?
Other than just the drive-by analysis on September 9th, which basically we didn't even leave the truck. That would be it.
On that drive-by, you said that you saw a few swales. Can you define a swale?
Sure. So we identified a number of different things, one of those being swales. We generally classify a swale as a grassed area that is used to basically drain farm fields. That's not used, or that's not included as part of the drain tile system.
Thank you. EcoCat, kind of a cool term. It's an Illinois thing, right? That's a drop down of questions, prepared questions for qualification.
So generally, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all right.
Well, just to give a general idea of what an EcoCat is, basically it's an online system where you input your project information, particularly your site, and what those boundaries are. And the state looks at it, does a general assessment of any identified species, threatened endangered species that are in that area, and it provides a report.
Okay, but it's not an in-person or actual on-the-ground audit?
It is not. It is online only.
Okay. I guess in your recommendation then as the hired engineer, I mean, it sounds like sorry, I'm trying to get to a question here. It sounds like, am I hearing you right, that you'd rather have boots on the ground exploring the terrain and so forth before you make any type of recommendations or qualifications to the project?
That would generally be correct, and the main reason is the regulatory agencies, including the Corps of Engineers, IEPA, IDNR, are going to require those surveys prior to actually permitting any sort of the project, regardless.
And to your knowledge, the swap hasn't been done yet?
To my knowledge, yes.
Could that be something that would be just as Mr. Huddleston's work, your work, everybody else's, would that be something that could directly impact a project of this size if it was of a negative performance?
Well, so we've done a significant number of large scale projects, whether it's solar or wind or oil and gas or whatever it is. And I mean, like I said, you can provide desktop analysis, but until you actually get boots on the ground and actually determine what's on the site, because there very well could be surprises. Those maps are only as good as they are just for providing a preliminary assessment. So there has been many cases where we've identified something that maybe we didn't see on the map and went back and a developer or a client basically had to change something based on the information we brought to the table.
I think the magnitude of this project is part of the problem. So let's break it down. In your opinion, in your professional opinion, would a small municipality or a town ever move forward with a project without first doing the swap analysis?
Well, it really depends on what they want to do. There are developers out there every single day that do projects without doing any of this analysis at all, based on their own judgment. So, they do a risk reward analysis, and if they determine that based on their site, they don't need to do these things, they just don't do them. There's some risk there, obviously. They could miss something. and be in trouble for it later, but, that's just up to the developer. But sometimes we don't even get that phone call, and that's just the way that goes.
Certainly, I appreciate that. So the 2 years of bare ground during construction, how well is that going to hold off rainwater erosion?
I'm not sure where the 2 years come.
I'm sorry, they told us that there'd be 2 years of build time.
Just the way you asked the question. If you were told that the construction was going to last 2 years,
Let's say you were told the construction process was going to last 2 years. What would mitigate, stop any runoff in your professional opinion?
Well, that's where the nurse cover crop comes in. So obviously, like any large scale project, 5,000 acres isn't going to get built at the exact same time. So I'm assuming that this would be phased, and each particular phase, once that part of that project was done, it would be seeded almost immediately, at least with the nurse crop, and then pretty quickly with the native seed mix.
And as long as it was a time of year where a nurse crop would actually germinate and grow, it might actually help.
That's correct. I know the majority of the nurse crops will grow generally most of the year. There are a few months, obviously, over the winter where it'd be tough, but there are some other things that the client could do in that case, like hydro seeding and things like that as well, that may help prevent that erosion. So, but again, I can't speak to what the timetable looks like on that construction.
Okay. Are all the endangered species in Lee County listed in your packet, to your knowledge?
Based on our assessment using the tools that we have, that is correct.
Okay. I can't believe I'm going to ask this question. You ever heard of a Blanding's turtle?
Repeat that one more time.
Have you ever heard of a Blanding's turtle?
Blanding's turtle. I have not had any dealings with the Blanding's turtle, no.
Me neither, but I do know that as early as this year, there was a large amount of.
now you're telling things.
Do you?
Trouble asking a question.
Do you?
The answer.
Are you of any knowledge of a release of Blanding's turtles in Lee County in 2020?
I am not knowledgeable of that, no.
Would that be something that could be researched by a common individual such as myself?
Well, based on the fact that you're bringing it to the table, I would guess the answer is yes.
I do appreciate your time and answering my questions here this evening. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Other people in the room. Yes, sir. Mr. Luz.
Adam Lutz from near Alena. Why just a desktop impact study as we sit here today?
I can't answer that question because obviously that would be more of a question for the client themselves or the applicant. But it is my understanding that field studies will be happening at some point.
Do you believe that field studies should be required before this county would approve a permit like this?
I can't answer that question.
Is it required for you to actually complete more survey than after this approval? Or this hearing or whatever we're having? Is it a requirement of you to complete this?
That would depend on the regulatory agencies and what they were asking for.
If I'm a non-participating landowner and I'm worried about a change in stormwater runoff that may impact me, is your study going to help put me at ease that you're studying this? You're studying to mitigate or to ensure that I'm safe?
Ensure is a strong word. We can't really, in our profession, ensure anything. We can just provide our best knowledge and put that into a plan. So to answer your question, as part of the project, we would provide a SWIP plan, which would, that plan, for stormwater has to be approved by the IEPA and the county themselves. So hopefully, the purpose of us preparing that SWIP plan is to meet the needs and to keep any stormwater on site or do the best we can with the BMPs that are available.
Thank you. I've got no further.
Thank you. Any other folks in the room? Yes, sir.
My name's Lauren Wasto Stewart.
Would you spell your last name for my court?
Guasto.
Thank you.
Yeah, have you noticed a lot of this property, proposed sites are up along the interstate?
Yes.
Okay, we've got, how would that affect the deer population? Would there be enough room for deer to, move around? I work for the state in the wintertime and I took a lot of dead deer.
That's a statement. Just ask him a question.
Okay. Well, that was it. How would it affect the deer population? Would that be a problem, the interstate and the fencing?
Without having any studies on it, I'm not 100% sure, but I wouldn't see it being really changing anything in that regard.
You wouldn't think it would cause more accidents?
Well, that's kind of the purpose of avoiding the wildlife corridors. I mean, obviously the deer wouldn't be in particular ag fields where the fence is, but they're still moving along the same corridors.
Yeah, they're in the fields all the time.
That's a statement.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just if you ask him, just say, are they in the fields all the time?
Yeah, are they in the fields all the time, deer?
They can be. I mean, obviously there are certain times of the year where they're more prone to be in fields than others.
Thank you. Any other folks by the raising of your hand? Yep, sir. And gray vest.
John Huber, Stewart. I think we should all watch Jeopardy more often. We get asked better questions. I guess the question was on the deer and coyote. Is this going to increase coyote?
I'm just like Alex Trebek. I just say, please phrase it in the terms of a question.
Perfect. We'll have to watch it before next meeting. You think it increased the coyote population since they have kind of a hidden spot they can get under the fences and in those areas, and they can be invasive?
It would really be hard for me to say yes or no to that question.
With those corridors being an excellent place for a deer stand.
As a hunter, yes.
Okay, that's all I have.
Thank you. Any other folks in the room? Okay, turning to the Zoomers, I remind you, Zoomers, if you're video conferencing and you want to ask a question of this witness, go to move your cursor down to near the bottom of the page, middle, it says participants, click on participants, and up should pop a list, and click on raise hand. If you're teleconferencing, in other words, you can just hear us, keep your cell phone on, but hit *9, and we should be able to see, I think, a hand raised then.
We have one.
Okay.
Looking. Looks like D. Duffy.
No, it would be Allie Huss.
Oh, she's in the upper. Okay, I see.
Yes, Allie Huss, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, you got a question of the witness? Go right ahead.
Yes. You mentioned your company has multiple locations. Which office are you out of?
I am out of our O'Fallon, Illinois office.
I'm sorry, I can't hear your response.
O'Fallon, Illinois.
Okay. You identified that there are wildlife corridors. How many are there?
We haven't numerically put a number to that. We've just, like I said, we've only done a very preliminary desktop analysis of where those forested areas are. But overall, like I had mentioned, they're predominantly along the riparian areas, along the water bodies within the survey area. But again, the majority of the site is agriculture.
Okay. Have there been studies that follow the impact on wildlife and threatened or endangered species for the duration of a 35-year solar project?
Not that I'm aware of, other than the assessments that these preliminary assessments we've been providing.
Okay. And when do you plan to do these fieldwork observations?
To my knowledge, that timeline has not been determined yet.
Is there a guarantee that these fieldwork observations will happen?
The timelines and the need will generally be determined by the dealings with the county, and then the regulatory agencies. So, no, I can't guarantee that any and all of these surveys will happen, but in most cases, it's been our understanding that on larger scale projects such as this, they will generally be required.
Okay. And if these statistical estimations that you have made change upon the field observation, how will the public be notified of this?
I can't particularly answer that question. All I can say is that we will provide our analysis and our reports to the applicants, and then provide general recommendations based on our findings. So what happens with those is generally out of our hands at that point.
Okay, so is it a fair statement that the field observations may not be made public to anyone other than the interested parties?
I don't know the answer to that question.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your response.
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other Zoomers? Give you 10 seconds to hit the icons. All right, seeing none, Mr. Mills, you may step down. Ms. Kennedy, are you prepared to go any further this evening?
We are, Your Honor.
Okay. Excuse me.
I'd like to call Mike Lear as our next witness. I believe he's on Zoom.
Oh, okay. Yes. Mr. Lear. I don't see you, Mr. Lear. Are you, say something so you pop up on the.
He's over here.
Oh, there's the name. So there, can you hear me or unmute? Can you unmute him? No.
It's not muted.
Okay. Mr. Lear? Calling.
Yes.
There, okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Have you got a video? Camera?
I'm sorry, there's a lot of echo. Can you say that again?
Yes, do you have a video camera you can turn on?
Yes, I do.
There you are. Mr. Lear, you want to raise your right hand for me, please? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, you may inquire, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. Mr. Lear, can you hear me all right?
I can. There's a lot of echo in the room, so I may have to ask you to repeat, but please bear with me.
Sure, we'll give it our best shot. Could you state your name and spell it for the record?
Yes, it's Mike Lear, L-E-H-R.
And can you give us a brief summation of your educational history?
Yes, I have a Bachelor of Science degree in mechanical engineering. I have a master's degree in business administration, and I'm a licensed professional engineer.
And how are you employed?
I'm employed by a company called Leidos Engineering.
And what does Leidos Engineering do?
We provided, over the last 60 years, we provide consulting services to the electric power industry. We've consulted on all kinds of projects all around the world. Nuclear, coal, gas turbines, a lot of solar, a lot of wind, hydro. So we've seen pretty much every power plant type project there is.
And what is your position with Leidos?
I'm a managing director.
And what does that entail?
Basically what it is I'm the person that deals mainly with clients. We do, just to give you a little background on Leidos, Leidos provides owner engineering type services to clients, as well as independent engineering services. So I manage both sides of that.
Are you familiar with Stewart Creek Solar LLC?
Yes, I am.
And how so?
I've reviewed all the documents. For example, I've reviewed the preliminary site layout drawings. I've read through the project description in detail. I've taken a look through the Lee County ordinances regarding solar projects. I've looked at the I can't remember the acronym, the IMA, I guess is what it's called. So I've read through that. I've looked through all of the attachments that were to the project description. And I believe that's about everything I've reviewed.
And are you aware that Stewart Creek Solar is a proposed 600 megawatt solar energy system that's to be constructed on about 5,000 acres?
Yes.
And you mentioned some experience with solar farms. What is the largest solar farm that you've interacted with?
Largest one I've worked on is 412 megawatt solar farm. It's currently under development and getting ready to start construction down in Texas.
And what is the largest wind farm that you've interacted with?
Myself, I have not done much on the wind side. Our company has. We've got a lot of wind experience, but that's one of the areas I really have not done much work in.
Is it fair to say that you're responsible for developing a construction plan for this project?
Yes.
And could you describe for this ZBA what that plan is or what it will encompass?
Well, the construction plan would start out basically as a high-level document. It would identify the requirements for the design that would have to go, that would start initially. It would outline the code requirements, the permit requirements. It would also outline any of the studies that would be incorporated into the project, such as the studies that have just been reviewed here tonight and any other studies that are done. So that whole plan becomes the high-level document with which the administering the construction of the project begins, and any details get filled in as the project progresses prior to the start of construction.
And what does the construction schedule look like?
The construction schedule for a project this size, again, a detailed schedule has not been developed, but for the project this size, and you probably heard this, it's probably about a 21 to 24 month construction schedule. Some of that's based on weather. The schedule starts basically with, once the permits are issued, the schedule could even, could even contain the permitting process, but typically the construction schedule starts once the permits are issued, the design starts, then the procurement and on-site construction activities start, and it takes it all the way through testing and commercial operations.
And are there any construction activities that will take place that would involve any disturbances or any impacts that residents in the area will see?
Yes, as any project, especially one of this size, there are going to be things that the residents will see. There's no large, with solar projects, there's no large pieces of equipment out there. You wouldn't see cranes out there like you would on other either building construction or power plant construction. Everything's very low level. The biggest types of equipment that you'll see on site would be forklifts to move the materials and equipment around, and the pile driving units. Those aren't large units, but the pile driving units. So as a resident, you will see that equipment. It would obviously be off in a distance, probably even from the nearest buildings, until even with the setbacks. And then you would hear some noise during the pile driving, but that noise is relatively, by the time it gets to where the site boundary is usually very, very low level. You could still carry on a conversation while they're driving piles if you were standing at the site boundary. It's very, from a power plant standpoint, the construction of the solar plants is very minimal impact to residents.
And is it a fair statement that those disturbances or impacts would cease once construction is complete?
Correct.
Will the construction for this project require the construction of any new roads?
Yes, it will. The roads would be internal roads to the project site, not new county or township roads, but it would be roadways in the different areas of the project.
And I'm not certain that I heard you correctly, but you said there would be no new county or township roads, is that correct?
As far as I understand, that's correct.
How will the materials for construction be stored?
Materials on a solar site it's a little different than some of the other power plants or maybe even some large industrial constructions, in that the solar site is very spread out, as you well know, with 5,000 acres. So the materials would come in. There's usually a central receiving area at the site that's designated by the construction contractor. Once the materials are received at that point, they're inspected, and then most of that material, again, due to the large area of the site, that material gets moved out and staged to where it's going to be needed at the in the particular area of the site. So you don't usually end up with a big storage area with all the equipment and all the materials for the site in one area. It gets staged out fairly quickly.
And would the storage of those materials be within the project site?
Yes, they would be maintained within the fenced boundaries of the project site.
How many employees will be utilized during this construction process?
Typically, a project this size would range in the order of maybe 300, on average, maybe 250 people on the site. During the peak time, it might go up to possibly 400, 450 people.
And where will these individuals park?
They would park on the site. As the site starts construction, not 400 people are going to show up on day one. So the way the construction and the parking would progress is, as the project, and I'll go through this in a little more detail in my presentation, is a phased project. So there would be a main parking area on the north side of the site where it starts construction. And then as the project moves south, other parking areas would be developed so that the craft labor that's working in the areas as the project develops would drive to those particular parking areas so that they're close to where they're doing work.
Are you familiar with what's known as a road use agreement?
Yes, I am.
And are you aware that the Lee County ordinance for solar energy systems requires the applicant to enter into a road use agreement with the county and townships affected?
Yes, I am.
And to the best of your knowledge, does Stewart Creek intend to enter into a road use agreement with the county and the townships?
Yes, to the best of my knowledge, that's true.
Now, you mentioned the AMA, or the Agricultural Impact Mitigation Agreement. Can you tell me what that is?
Well, it's an agreement that has several points, and I'll touch on some of these in my slide presentation. It has several points that have to be addressed as a part of constructing the project. As an example, it discusses support structures, above ground facilities that are going to be on the project site, topsoils, how they're going to be handled, rock removal, compaction on the site, the erosion, prevention of erosion during construction on the site, clearing of any trees or grubbing of the land prior to starting construction. It talks about access roads, and so it kind of covers the whole gambit of the activities that would happen during construction.
And so is it a fair statement that the AMA sets forth certain guidelines that must be followed during the construction process?
Yes.
Are you familiar with what's known as the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan?
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
And what is that?
What it is a plan that's put together prior to the start of construction that describes how stormwater on the site during construction is going to be handled, whether there's going to be additional new runoff channels required. Some of this may come from some of the studies that Huddleston and McBride may do. There may be some other hydrologists that look at that as well. But what it does is it establishes areas where the runoff is, whether there's going to be any temporary ponding or site collection ponds needed. And it would also identify how the erosion control is going to be handled around the perimeters of the site, silt fencing, hay bales, and those types of things.
And is this SWIP plan required prior to construction?
Yes.
But it's not required to be entered into or to have designed at the time of this hearing, is that correct?
No, that's correct. You have to, the plan is put together, and it's best if it's put together once you have a construction company selected, because they can provide input on the best ways to control certain things on the site. They would take into account the hydrology studies and so forth and have input into developing that. So usually the SWIP is issued out, again, it's prior to construction, but not this building project.
And at the time of the execution of this SWIP plan, the Lee County Soil and Water Conservation District would surely weigh in on that, is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
Will you work with Huddleston McBride to identify and avoid drain tiles within the project area?
Yes, as they kind of alluded to in their presentation, they would survey the site and identify all the drain tiles and the paths that they take. And then once the layout for the site is fairly well established, and again, that's later on in the project rather than right now, but before construction. Once that is established, then you would lay out basically the location of all the piles that are driven and all the underground electrical cables. And if there is any conflict between the drain tiles, then you'd obviously want to work with Huddleston and McBride to either reroute the drain tiles around where the obstruction or the conflict would be, Or you could alter the design a little bit to some extent, move a pile here or there, or move a trench over to miss the drain tile. So it usually ends up kind of being a give and take as the project gets designed.
Does the EMA have any requirements as to what happens when a drain tile is hit?
Well, obviously it would have to be corrected. I don't recall the exact words in the EMA, but I know for this project, it's a commitment by the owners that if the drain tile is hit, it would be, work would stop and that drain tile would, at least in that area, would be rerouted around or repaired so that the drain tile effectively would still be intact afterwards, after the repair.
It's my understanding that you've prepared a PowerPoint presentation for tonight. Is that true?
Yes, that's correct.
I'm going to ask you to share your screen and to proceed with your PowerPoint presentation.
Okay. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
We can, thank you.
Okay, great. So first of all, let's start off with, again, you know my name is Mike Lear. I've stated that up front. I'm the Stewart Creek Consulting Construction Manager. I work for a company called Leidos, and as I alluded to earlier, we have extensive experience in large renewable energy projects, including wind, even though my experience personally hasn't been a lot of wind, but I certainly have a lot of solar, nuclear, coal, gas turbine projects under my belt. A little bit about Leidos. Leidos and the solar side, we've advised over 64 gigawatts of solar projects, and I know that gigawatt may not mean a lot to everybody, but that could power several large cities with that kind of output across the country. As an example, a couple of the projects that Leidos has done, the Copper Mountain Solar Complex was a 557 megawatt project located outside Las Vegas. And it was kind of similar to this project in that it was made up really of 4 smaller projects that totaled up to the 557 megawatts. So it was a staged project similar to Stewart Creek. The California Flat Solar Project was outside of San Luis Obispo and provides all the renewable power to Apple Computer. And then the AB Solar Ranch Project's a 241 megawatt project, again located in California. And it's up outside of Los Angeles and provides some of the power for the city of Los Angeles. So that's just kind of a brief, I mean, Leidos has way more than that, but it's just kind of a snapshot of a few solar projects Leidos has done. My experience, I've done several large solar projects. The Intersect Solar Project that I'm working on right now is a 412 megawatt project. It's located in Texas. The Mount Signal 3 project is a project that just finished up here recently. It's located in El Centro, California. And again, that project is similar to this one. A lot of these are because they were out on farmland. Particularly the Mount Signal 3 project was on a 5,000 acre site, farmland spread out just about like this project was. So this slide shows the overall layout for the project. So the project is bounded on the north side by Gurley Road. It's bounded on the east side basically by the West County Line Road. It's bounded on the west side by Interstate Highway 39, and on the south side by Highway 30. So that kind of gives the whole encompassing side of the project. So the project's going to be phased in 3 phases. You may have already heard that, and I'll go show you those phases in a little more detail in a couple of following slides here. So the phases will be from north to south, and that's how construction will proceed. Construction is slated right now to start in late 2022. So following on from that slide, this is the kind of the layout that would be in the north phase of the project. And again, it's bounded on the north side by Gurley Road, and on the south side by Perry Road. And the size of this project will probably be just a little less than 1/3. The output of this project on the megawatts scales, about a little less than 1/3 of the total output of the project. The project will then, construction-wise, move from the north as things progress to the central portion of the project. And the central portion of the project's bounded by Perry Road on the north and Herman Road on the south side. And the output of this central portion of the project would be just a little over 1/3 of the output of the project. And then the south phase of the project is shown here, and it's bounded by Herman Road to the north and Willow Creek Road basically to the south. There's one portion that might be that's a little south of Willow Creek, but it's kind of the guidelines just to give everybody a feel for what that south project is. And the size of this output of this portion of the project would again be about 1/3 of the output of the project. So with that in mind, one of the early on things that has to be looked at is the how the sites are going to be accessed. And so this slide gives you an idea of exactly how we're planning to access these sites specifically. So all of the access would come off of Interstate 39, basically at 2 points, at Perry Road and down at Highway 30. So these access would be up the local roads and into the sites. And so as an example, access to the north side, you would go up Paw Paw Road to whichever crossroad you would need to go to get entrance to where you're working on the north side. Then for the central portion of the project, again, most of the deliveries and access would be off of Perry Road, down Paw Paw Road, into the central portion of the project, as you can see, for access to that portion down through Herman Road. And then for the south portion of the project, the access would mainly be off of I-39 through the Highway 30 exit and then north on Paw Paw Road to gain access to the sites. So based on that, preliminary road use agreement has been put together, and it's been reviewed by the Willow Creek Township and the Alto Township, and the preliminary, there hasn't been any concerns voiced about the road use, preliminary road use. So there will be a final road use agreement. And again, it will be with the townships, and that would be in place before the project started construction. You'd asked earlier about the AMA and some of the things that it talks about. This provides a list of the topics that are in the AMA. I'm not going to touch upon every one of these bullet points, but there's a few here that I've bolded that I will touch on. The topsoil removal and replacement, there's no plan to take the topsoil off the project site at all and take it off the project site. If there's topsoil that has to be removed to either level or fill in, it'll all be topsoil from the project site and used at the project specifically. There won't be anything removed from the project site. The routing of the drain tiles, the previous presentation touched on that in a lot more detail than what I plan to talk about. But again, if, as I stated earlier, if a drain tile during the design of the project, once the drain tiles are surveyed and laid out, if the design identifies where it would interfere with a drain tile, the drain tile will either be slated to be moved to allow the either the post or the underground cable burial there, or if it's amenable, maybe a post can be moved or the underground trench can be moved. So it'll be worked out at that point to minimize any impact on the drainage tiles. Prevention of soil erosion, again, that would be, in the SWIP covers some of this, but again, that would be putting in, compacting the soil for the roadways, putting in gravel roadways for the sites, limiting the speed limits on the sites, putting in silt barriers around the project sites and hay bales around the project sites during construction. And then as it moves into the operation phase, once construction finishes up, as in the previous presentation, then there would be native grasses planted to prevent the erosion. And if there is any, during construction, any identified specific areas where there's a lot of dust generated or erosion type things, the construction company could come in and spray those areas to prevent the dust type erosion from the project site during construction. So additionally, there's going to be permits that are going to be required to construct this. The SWIP, which we've already touched on. There's going to be building permits, electrical permits, and as well as the road use agreement. So those are the types of things that get in place prior to starting construction. So this slide is to give everybody kind of an idea of construction, how it progresses a little bit. As I stated earlier, construction on this project of this size be 21 to 24 months. It'll be in the 3 phases we've discussed. So at the start of construction, what happens is the site gets prepared, and that doesn't necessarily mean the whole site is gone in and regraded. A lot of these solar projects anymore like to maintain, and again for drainage, they like to maintain the topography of the site because that helps the drainage as it is, and tries not to disturb, if there's low vegetation on the site, by low I mean grasses or something like that, tries not to disturb that. There's no need to really just make the site completely bare ground to install these solar facilities anymore. So the site would be prepared for the start of construction. Then the access roads would be installed. The gravel would be placed down and compacted for the roads. And then the SWIP for the construction portion would be implemented for the silt barriers, and those types of things would be erected. And any drainage channels that may be needed or drainage ponds, those would all be put in at the start of construction. As I said earlier too, the topsoil will be retained on site, and the civil work, really, we try to minimize that. There's no need to go in and regrade these sites. Once the site is really prepared from a topography standpoint, then the piles are driven, and the picture on the upper right shows the pile driving machine, and there's a guy standing next to it so you can get an idea of how big the machine is. The piles are driven typically about 6 to 8 feet. That gets determined by a geotechnical report that'll be done. That'll establish the actual depth of the piles that need to be driven. In some cases, they get driven less, some cases more, but in general, it'll probably be on the order of 4 to 6 feet, or 6 to 8 feet, I'm sorry. So once the piles are installed, and not all the piles have to be installed at the site before the erection of the solar panels begins, the way the construction will progress is piles will get driven in a certain area, and then the racking for the solar panels will start coming in where they'll bolt onto the piles. So even while they're driving piles in another portion of the project, maybe even that same area, just further down, they'll start bolting the racking up and putting the solar panels in place. And you can see what the solar panels, how they're installed in the picture on the lower right. Everything that's put in from the solar, from onto the piles, the solar racking and the panels, it's all bolted connections. There's nothing welded on it. Then once the solar panels are up, and again, it doesn't have to be for the full site, just once several rows of the solar panels are up, the electricians will come in and start connecting the wires. They join them in series down the panels. Now the panels produce direct current so that the electricity flows through some wires over to an inverter. There'll be several inverters on site, and they will take this direct current out of the solar panels and convert it to alternating current, which is then routed over to the substation and out to the power grid. As stated earlier in some of the other presentations, there will be a 6-foot chain link fence around each of the project sites, and it'll have stranded barbed wire on the top. The operation and maintenance phase, I want to touch on that just a little bit too. Once the plant is constructed and deemed commercially operable, the operation maintenance phase, the plant will actually be controlled off-site. So there'll be very few people actually on site, and they will be mainly just a few folks coming and checking on the project, making sure nothing's been damaged, doing any preventive maintenance that may need to be done, spraying weeds as needed and mowing as needed. So there's very little, once the project's in place, there's very little amount of people coming onto the project site and very little noise at all. It's just mainly vehicles coming off the site. So with that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Just a few follow-up questions for you, Mr. Lear.
Sure.
Does that SWIP plan end once construction is completed?
It's usually dictated by what the county requires, or the local ordinance, I guess I should say. Yes, the SWIP from that standpoint usually ends at the end of construction. I have not seen projects in the past where the SWIP has continued on past construction during operation. So in my experience, yes, it usually ends at the end of construction.
But the EMO would continue throughout the general operation of the project, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
I have nothing further.
All right, I hate to do this, but we're going to. Mr. Lear, we'll see you tomorrow night. Tomorrow we'll begin at 7 o'clock. You can be cross-examined by the state's attorney, the zoning officer, the ZBA, and other interested parties who are either here or on Zoom. So 7 o'clock tomorrow night, okay with your schedule, sir?
Yes, it is.
Okay, we'll flip your image up then. Thanks. Have a good evening, everybody.
Yeah. It's okay. You could really, think about if you really got the new screen around.
4.
Right, 4, yeah, you're right.
I thought I.
No. Yeah, that's because everybody's like, let's get this done. Yeah.
See you tomorrow.
Didn't get it done. I don't call it once a meeting. One for you.
Did you harvest the snow?
For the, yes, I did.
Huh?
Yes, I did.
Did you really?
Well, we can talk for about 15, 20 minutes.
It snowed a lot.
No, we run right through it. We don't want to get done tomorrow, I think.
Kind of a little disconcert. Are you gonna get done tomorrow?
If everything holds together. Oh, that John Deere stays together.
That'll stay together. All right, brother is Alice, there ain't no more.